Hey everyone, you ever been reading the Bible and suddenly hit a part that just makes you stop and go, wait a minute, that doesn't add up? Yeah, you're definitely not alone. So today we're gonna jump right into some of those tough questions, these so-called plot holes, and see if we can make sense of them. And we're starting with a bombshell of a claim, basically that the whole story of Satan being cast out of heaven, one of the most famous stories ever, isn't actually in the Bible. Now that's a pretty big accusation against the text's coherence. So is the story really missing, or are we just not looking in the right places? Okay, to figure this out, we need the right tools for the job. Think of these as our investigative toolkit. We've got soteriology, which is all about salvation. That's going to help us with the whole problem of evil thing. Then there's Christology, the study of who Jesus is, which is crucial for those paradoxes about him. And finally, exegesis, which is just the fancy word for digging into what a text actually meant to its original audience. That one's going to be our go-to for pretty much everything. So here's our roadmap for today. We'll start by looking at the critique itself. Then we're going to tackle 4 big objections one by one. Satan's supposedly missing origin story, the mystery of when angels were made, that classic God and evil dilemma, and a real head-scratcher about Jesus. And then, at the end, we'll see how it all connects with one big idea. All right, let's dive into that first objection, the idea that the Bible is weirdly quiet about where Satan came from. Is this a giant plot hole? I mean, is the villain's backstory just missing? So the argument is pretty straightforward. If there's no chapter titled The Biography of Lucifer, then does the story even count as being in the Bible? And you know, the critic is right about one thing. The Bible is absolutely not a biography of Satan. Not even close. The focus is somewhere else entirely. But does that mean the story isn't there? Or is it just told in a different way? This gets at a really common logical trap called the fallacy of silence. It's basically assuming that if something isn't spelled out for you in one neat little package, it must not exist. But the biblical reality is, well, it's just not written like that. The story is woven thematically, like a tapestry, with important threads appearing in different books written centuries apart. And this is how you start to piece that puzzle together. For the why of the fall, pride, you look at these incredible passages in Isaiah and Ezekiel. They're talking about the fall of human kings, but the language they use, it points to something much bigger, a cosmic divine being. Then you jump to Revelation for the how, where it literally describes a war in heaven. And for the core reason, 1 Timothy connects the dots for us, linking the devil's condemnation directly to pride. So you see, the story is there. It's just not a simple campfire story. And this whole idea of finding pieces of the story in different places brings us straight to our second objection. Okay, so if Satan and the angels fell from heaven, when were they even created in the first place? Right? The question makes perfect sense. You read Genesis chapter 1 and you get the whole play-by-play. Light, earth, sky, animals, humans. But not a single word about angels or any other spiritual beings. It feels like a pretty huge omission, doesn't it? Like, where did they come from? Well, this objection is built on assuming that Genesis 1 has to be the only creation story in the entire Bible. It's like thinking the first scene of a movie has to explain every character's complete backstory. The reality is, Genesis 1 has a super specific job, getting the physical planet ready for humanity. It's not trying to be a complete history of the entire cosmos. And this timeline shows it perfectly. If you go to the book of Job, which is one of the oldest books in the Bible, God is talking to Job and he asks him, "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation and all the sons of God shouted for joy?" Whoa! So the angels, the sons of God, were already there, watching and celebrating as the physical world was being made. And if that wasn't clear enough, the New Testament just hammers the point home. Colossians says that through Christ, all things were created, things visible and invisible. And then it even lists different ranks of angelic beings. So yeah, a whole invisible spiritual realm was created. It just wasn't the main character in the story Genesis 1 was telling.
So this leads us right into one of the biggest, oldest, and toughest theological questions of all time, the problem of evil.
And here's the objection. It's a heavy one. If God knows everything, then he had to have known Lucifer was going to rebel. So if he created him anyway, doesn't that make God the ultimate author of evil? I mean, how can a good God knowingly create the very source of all sin and suffering? The answer, theologically speaking, is to avoid something called a category error. In this case, that means confusing knowing something is going to happen with making it happen. Think about it like this. A weather forecaster knows a hurricane is going to hit a town, but that foreknowledge doesn't cause the storm. The argument is that God's knowledge works the same way. Knowing what choice someone will make isn't the same as forcing them to make it.
And this all comes down to that huge concept, free will. The idea is that for love to be real, it can't be forced. The option to not love, to rebel, has to exist. So God didn't create evil. He created a perfect being, but part of that perfection was a genuine free will. God's foreknowledge didn't cause the fall, it just meant he already had a rescue plan in motion before it ever happened.
All right, let's get into our last objection, and honestly, this one is probably the most theologically complex. It's what's known as the Christological paradox, and yeah, it's a bit of a mind bender. Okay, so this paradox has two parts that seem totally contradictory. First, in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus says, "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven." How? That happened thousands of years before he was born in Bethlehem. And second, in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus is praying to God the Father. But wait, if Jesus is God, isn't he praying to himself? The logical mistake here, according to classic Christian theology, is seeing Jesus as only a man. The biblical teaching is way more complex. It's a doctrine called the hypostatic union, and it holds that Jesus isn't half God, half man. He is fully God and fully man, 100% of both in one person. And once you grasp that one concept, both parts of the paradox just click. First, pre-existence. As the eternal Word of God from the Gospel of John, Jesus existed before time began, so of course he saw Satan fall. He was there. And second, that prayer in Gethsemane, it isn't God talking to himself. It's Jesus in his complete humanity, submitting his human will to the will of the Father. It's a perfect picture of obedience. Whew, okay, we have been through 4 pretty huge objections, so let's zoom out now and put all the pieces back on the table. What's the common thread here? What connects all these answers? Just take a look at this summary. A missing origin story? No, it's told through prophecy and revelation. Angels created out of nowhere? Nope, Job tells us they were there at the beginning. Jesus having impossible memories or praying to himself, not when you understand he's both eternal God and submissive man. You see the pattern, right? The information is always in the text. It's just not where you might first think to look.
And that brings us to the real heart of the matter. These perceived plot holes aren't really about missing information. They're about a mismatch in literary style. We are trying to read this collection of ancient, theological, thematic texts as if it were a modern, straightforward novel. But it's playing by a different set of rules. It has a different storytelling code.
So that leaves us with one last question to think about. If we can adjust how we read, if we can learn to approach this ancient library on its own terms, what other so-called plot holes might actually turn into something profound? What else could we understand if we stopped looking for a modern biography and started looking for the ancient blueprint it's always claimed to be? Thanks so much for digging into this with me.